I'm Clara, 32 years old, and in the last 72 hours, I lost everything. My bakery, burned to the ground. Every loaf I kneaded with my bare hands, every dream I wrapped in flour and sugar, turned to ash. I went back to my parents' house, the living room still gleaming, still fragrant with Earl Grey tea. I said, my voice trembling, "I'm not asking for a handout. I just need to borrow a little. I'll pay it back." My father didn't look up from his newspaper. "Business is a risk, Clara. You lose, you take the loss." My mother smiled faintly. "The savings are for Ethan. He has real talent." And before I could even respond, her phone rang. Ethan calling from Bali. "Mom, I need more money. I haven't found my inspiration yet." "Of course, sweetheart." I stood there, between the scent of tea and the stench of hypocrisy. They didn't just refuse me, they erased me from this family. I didn't cry, didn't beg, because right then, I understood. They'd just given me a reason to stop being a victim. For the first time in my life, I saw clearly. Blood doesn't always mean family. They taught me that when you're abandoned, you only have two choices: fall down or stand up and make them regret it. I turned and walked out through the heavy oak door without a word of goodbye. The cold Austin afternoon air rushed in, stinging my face, but it couldn't compare to the ice that had just frozen my heart in that Earl Grey-scented living room. I didn't go anywhere, just stood silently on the sidewalk, looking at the house where I grew up, a place I once called home. They didn't just refuse me, they erased me. And then memories came flooding back, uninvited, rolling in like a storm. A film rewinding to show why, even when I'd lost everything, I still had something they could never touch: the truth. The rolling pin wasn't just a passing hobby. It was my soul. I remember the first day I got the keys to the space, an old place caked with dust, but in my eyes it was an entire world. I spent 6 months scraping off layers of old paint, laying each decorative tile, and building every wooden shelf with my own hands. I wanted every small corner to smell of dedication, and it succeeded. The tinkling doorbell welcoming customers became the neighborhood's familiar tune. People came not just for the 1,000-layer croissants or the snow-dusted sourdough loaves. They came for the warmth, for the scent of butter and vanilla intertwined, for my smile behind the counter. It wasn't just my own delusion. In year 3, the Austin Chronicle awarded the Rolling Pin Best Local Bakery. I framed the article and hung it in the most prominent place. I remember calling home, my voice full of excitement, to share the news. "It's just a local award, Clara," my mother said over the phone, her voice flat. "Don't get too full of yourself. Our Ethan just had a piece selected for exhibition at a small gallery. Now that's real art." I fell silent. My father didn't even say congratulations. A week later, Sarah Jennings, an influential food blogger with the account Savor the South, happened to stop by. She wrote a long review, calling my lemon tart a perfect poem. Online orders were overloaded for a month after that. When I told my father, he just turned a page of his newspaper and said, "All that fake internet stuff, you should focus on more practical things." They never set foot in my bakery. Not once. They saw my passion, my sweat, my success recognized by the entire city. And all they saw was an unworthy distraction. Meanwhile, Ethan, my younger brother, was an artist. At least that's what my parents told everyone. The real talent my mother mentioned was a string of expensive failures wrapped in flowery language. Ethan had dropped out of the Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, one of the most expensive art schools in America, after 2 years because he felt its curriculum stifled creativity. My parents had paid over $100,000 for that stifling. Then came his installation art project. Ethan rented an old warehouse, hung up some projectors, and called it a Multi-sensory experience of urban emptiness. That experience cost my parents another $30,000 and only attracted a few of his friends to see it. When the project failed, my mother sighed and told relatives, "Such a shame. Austin isn't ready for this kind of pioneering art." Most recently was the NFT project. Ethan had convinced my father to invest $20,000 in a collection of pixel apes that he claimed would change the art world. 6 months later, they were worth less than one of my loaves of bread. Every time Ethan failed, he never had to take responsibility. There was always a reason. Teachers didn't understand him. Audiences weren't sophisticated enough. The market wasn't mature. And there was always a check from mom and dad to soothe his creative pain. Ethan got funded for ideas, while I had to build an empire with my own two hands. The injustice didn't stop there. I was also their invisible safety net. I remember clearly the night Mom called me, her voice panicked. Ethan had maxed out his credit card on that multi-sensory experience and was $5,000 in debt. "Can you help him, Clara?" My mother sobbed. "If your father finds out, he'll be furious." I transferred the money, $5,000 from the savings I'd planned to use for a new oven. Ethan didn't even call to say thank you. 2 years ago, a storm swept through, severely damaging my parents' roof. Insurance only covered part of it, and they were $7,000 short. My father, the man who always talked about self-reliance, sat silently in the living room with a sour expression. I knew he'd never ask, so I withdrew the money myself and gave it to him. He just nodded. "Yeah, okay." My mother patted my head like a child and said, "Good girl." $7,000, not a word of thanks. Just a reluctant acknowledgement that my existence was occasionally useful. I was the practical daughter, the problem solver. So Ethan, their genius, could be free to soar in his world of fanciful ideas. But there was one thing they never knew. Perhaps it was because of their contempt that I did it. About 4 years ago, I started a side project, my own secret place. I created the channel Clara's Kitchen Creations. At first, it was just a simple blog where I shared recipes not on the bakery menu. Gradually, I started filming tutorial videos, sharing techniques that had taken me years to perfect. And it exploded. I wasn't just a food blogger. I was a professional baker, and that authenticity attracted tens of thousands of followers. I created a Patreon account where supporters paid monthly to access in-depth classes and receive exclusive recipes. Then I opened an online store selling premium baking kits, pre-prepared boxes with the highest quality dry ingredients for my recipes. That online empire, the thing my father called fake internet stuff, generated 6 figures in revenue each year. It was bigger than the rolling pins revenue. It was my insurance, my ace in the hole. The fire was a tragedy. It burned down my tangible dream, where I poured my sweat and tears. But it couldn't touch the invisible empire I'd built in silence. I took a deep breath, the cold air making my chest ache. The memory film stopped. And now, standing before the house that had rejected me, I understood something. I didn't really come back to ask for money. I came back to give them one last chance. A chance to act like a family. A chance to prove I existed in their hearts. And they gave me the clearest answer. They failed the test. And by doing so, they set me free. They gave me the most powerful weapon, the freedom to act without being bound by so-called family ties. The game was only now truly beginning. I didn't drive to my temporary rental apartment. Instead, I pulled into a 24-hour coffee shop on the edge of town. The kind with slightly sticky floors and bitter coffee. I sat in a dark corner, opened my laptop. The screen lit up, casting cold blue light on my emotionless face. No tears. The pain had frozen into something sharper, colder, determination. They thought they'd pushed me into the mud. They didn't know they'd just given me solid ground to rebuild on. This time, I wouldn't just rebuild a bakery. I'd build an empire, right on the ashes they'd turn their backs on. I opened a new spreadsheet, numbers beginning to dance under my fingers. The plan was taking shape, not with flour and sugar, but with numbers and iron logic. The next morning, I had an appointment. David Chen's office was on the 20th floor of a glass building downtown, overlooking all of Austin. David and I had gone to business school together. While I chose the dusty path of a small business owner, he'd become a sharp lawyer specializing in real estate and corporate deals. He walked into the conference room, shaking my hand. "Clara, you look resilient. I heard about the fire. Terrible." "That's not the worst part, David," I said, my voice calm. I told him everything, not like a victim, but like a client presenting a case. I told him about the bakery, about family, about Ethan, and about yesterday's conversation. David listened, his professional expression gradually shifting to astonishment, then to anger on my behalf. "They really said that?" "Word for word," I confirmed. "And that's why I'm here. I don't need a shoulder to cry on, I need a lawyer." I pushed the laptop toward him, the screen showing a financial summary of Clara's Kitchen Creations. "This is what I actually have." David squinted at the numbers. He looked up, an admiring smile flashing across his lips. "Clara, you're a fox in baker's clothing." "The issue isn't money, David," I said, my voice trembling with real emotion. "I can rebuild on my own. I just wanted to see, just once, if they'd choose me. And they didn't." I took a deep breath, regaining my composure. "Now I want to hire you. I have a plan, and it needs to be completely legal, airtight, and irreversible." David nodded, his eyes lighting up with the interest of a shark smelling blood in the water. "I already like your plan," he said. "Let's begin." That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I appeared on camera looking imperfect. Sitting in my makeshift kitchen, no makeup, hair hastily tied back, I went live. "Hey everyone," I began, my voice slightly hoarse. Thousands of viewers immediately joined. "As many of you know, the rolling pin is gone." I told them about the fire, about what I'd lost. I allowed myself to be vulnerable, to be hurt. But then, I lifted my head, my eyes becoming resolute. "But a bakery is just 4 walls. Its spirit is here," I pointed to my heart, "and in our community. I'm not asking for donations. Instead, I want to invite you to rebuild with me. Starting today, I'm launching a special recipe collection called From the Ashes." The response was unbelievable. My inbox flooded with encouragement, but more importantly, sales exploded. The From the Ashes recipe collection and accompanying baking kits sold tens of thousands of units in just 1 week. The money wasn't just enough to rebuild 10 bakeries. It was enough to start a war. 2 weeks later, David called me. "Good news," he said. "My sources say your parents are in real trouble. Funding Ethan's inspiration-seeking trip has eaten through most of their savings. They're preparing to sell your grandmother Eleanor's house." My heart twisted. Grandma's house. That's where I'd baked my first cookies, where she taught me to distinguish real vanilla from fake. To me, it was a treasure trove of memories. To my parents, it was just an old house on a troublesome piece of land they had to pay taxes on every year. And it was located on South Congress, one of Austin's fastest-growing and most expensive neighborhoods. "They don't know they're sitting on a gold mine," David said. "They just want to sell quickly for cash." "Perfect," I replied, a cold thought forming in my mind. "David, set up a company." We acted quickly. David established a limited liability company with an innocuous name, Oak Hill Properties. Through a real estate broker, Oak Hill approached my parents with an offer. The price we offered was about 10% above market value, attractive enough to make them feel like they'd hit the jackpot, but not high enough to raise suspicion. To be sure, I had David arrange a supporting act. Another shell company, posing as a large developer, also made an offer, but 15% below market value, with demands that they cover clearance costs themselves. As I predicted, my father was furious at the low offer, and it made Oak Hill's offer seem all the more generous and trustworthy. They took the bait. But the game was never that easy. A week later, David called me, his voice somewhat tense. "Clara, we have a problem," he said. "A real developer, Lone Star Realty, just jumped in. They made an offer only 5% lower than ours. They see the land's potential. Your parents are considering it. They've scheduled a meeting with Lone Star tomorrow." My heart sank a beat. An unforeseen variable. They might use Lone Star's offer to pressure Oak Hill for a higher price, David analyzed. What do we do? Raising the price again would be very suspicious. I was silent for a moment, my mind working at full capacity. This was the deciding moment. Back down one step, and the plan would crumble. "No," I said, my voice decisive. "We don't raise the price. We accelerate the timeline. David, draft a contract addendum. Oak Hill is ready to pay the entire amount in cash within 24 hours of signing, and will also cover all taxes and transfer fees, something Lone Star definitely won't do." "That's a huge risk, Clara. You're betting they need cash immediately." "I'm not betting," I replied, my voice cold. "I know my brother. Ethan's coming back soon, and he won't be able to wait. Send that offer right now." It was a long night. I didn't sleep. Just sat staring at my phone screen, waiting. I was betting on my own family's greed and short-sightedness. The next morning, David called back. I could hear the smile in his voice. "You won, Clara. They canceled the meeting with Lone Star. They want to sign the contract with us this Friday." I breathed a sigh of relief, but felt no joy, only the cold emptiness of a victory foretold. That evening, David and I met at a quiet bar to review the final paperwork. After everything was settled, he looked at me, his eyes no longer those of a lawyer but of a friend. "Are you sure you want to go all the way, Clara?" he asked. "After Friday, there's no turning back. Everything will fall apart." I gently turned the glass in my hand, watching the condensation droplets roll down. "David, do you know what my grandmother Eleanor used to say?" I asked. She said, "You can bake the best cakes in the world, but if you do it in a cold kitchen, your heart will grow cold too." That house was her warm kitchen. My parents, they're selling that warmth to fund something empty. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this to reclaim Grandma's legacy, to keep it from being sold cheap for selfishness. I looked up, meeting David's eyes. "I'm not breaking my family. I'm just officially acknowledging a truth that it's been broken for a very long time." David nodded, saying nothing more. He understood. This wasn't a war over money, but a war to reclaim a soul. Right then, Ethan came back. The Bali trip had ended because his credit card was declined. He returned not with artistic inspiration, but with a tan and an even more arrogant attitude. Instead of running into him by chance, this time Ethan actively sought out my temporary rental apartment. He stood at the door, arms crossed, looking at me with a probing expression. "I heard you're doing really well with your online stuff," he said, glancing inside the apartment where I'd set up a professional filming corner. "Looks pretty decent. But don't forget who has the real talent in this family." "What do you want, Ethan?" I asked, not inviting him in. "Mom and Dad said you seem unhappy they're selling Grandma's house," he said, his voice challenging. "Don't be dramatic, Clara. It's just an old house. I need capital for my new project. Something that'll put our family name on the art world map." "Our family?" I repeated, a bitter smile flashing across my face. "Really?" "Look," He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Don't be so selfish. You lost a bakery, that sucks, but don't ruin my future because of it. Mom and Dad have taken care of you enough. Now it's time for you to support me. His shamelessness almost made me laugh. I just silently looked at him. My eyes must have said it all, because Ethan stepped back, somewhat uncomfortable. Fine, he muttered. Be a bitter failure, I don't care, as long as I get what I want. He had no idea that his own stupidity and greed were the final catalyst, pushing my parents to sign their own sentence. He was the perfect pawn in my chess game. David's office was the embodiment of power and success. Glass, steel, and walnut wood. When my parents and Ethan walked in, they looked small and out of place, but their faces showed utter triumph. My mother wore her finest silk blouse. My father tried to look like a seasoned businessman. Ethan looked around the room with the eyes of someone who believed he deserved all of this. They sat across from David, satisfied smiles evident on their lips. They were about to get a large sum of money. Ethan was about to get his gallery. All problems were solved. David pushed the contract stack toward them. Everything's ready, just need your signatures here, he said, his voice professional. Excellent, my father said, picking up the pen. We're pleased this transaction went so smoothly. Before signing, David interrupted, there's a small formality. The owner of Oak Hill Properties wants to be present to personally thank you. My mother smiled, clearly very proud. Oh, how thoughtful. The conference room door opened softly. I walked in. I was no longer the daughter in a flour-dusted apron. I wore a perfectly tailored suit, my hair professionally styled, carrying a cold, powerful demeanor. Time seemed to stop. The smile on my mother's face froze. The pen in my father's hand trembled. Ethan's mouth hung open, his expression shifting from surprise to utter confusion. I walked to the head of the table, set down my leather briefcase, and looked straight into their eyes. I smiled, a smile without any warmth. Thank you, I said, my voice clear and steely, for selling me the house. Silence enveloped the room, heavy and suffocating. My father was the first to recover. What the hell is this, Clara? What kind of joke is this? He stammered. My mother raised her hand to cover her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. Clara, sweetheart, this is your grandmother's house. How could you use it to pull off such a cruel deception? A joke? I raised an eyebrow. No, Dad, this is business. You taught me that business is a risk. You lose, you take the loss, and the winner takes all. You tricked us, Ethan shouted, his face red with rage. Where'd you get the money? I didn't answer him. Instead, I signaled to David. He pressed a button on the remote, and the large screen behind me lit up. It wasn't a contract. It was a financial analysis of my company, Clara's Kitchen Creations. Numbers in the millions appeared, from Patreon revenue, from baking kit sales, from consulting contracts with major brands. You thought I needed your $50,000? I said, my voice echoing through the room. I never really needed the money. I just needed a reason. I gave you one last chance to be a family, and you threw it away to fund a vacation in Bali. My father stood up abruptly, pointing at me. So you lied. All this time you've been lying to us, pretending to be pitiful while you were hiding an entire fortune. I never lied, I replied, my eyes unwavering. I simply stopped allowing you to see my life, because you stopped caring about it years ago. My mother began to sob. Clara, how could you do this to us? I did this? I laughed bitterly. It was Mom who said we're done. I'm just respecting Mom's decision. You're finished, my father growled, trying to reclaim some final authority. This contract will be voided. Oh, I don't think so, I said, my voice soft but powerful. Because there's one more thing. I signaled to David again. The screen switched to another set of documents. Fire department reports and a series of email exchanges. David conducted a small investigation into the fire, I explained. The cause was most likely an electrical short from the decrepit wiring system of the abandoned building next to the rolling pin. I paused, looking straight into my father's eyes. I also discovered that 3 months before the fire, the neighborhood management sent an email to all owners, calling for a small contribution to repair and upgrade that building's electrical system. But one person refused. One person who thought it was not his problem. I pressed a button, and my father's reply email appeared on screen, large and clear. I will not pay a dime for someone else's problem. My father's face turned white as a sheet. His indifference, his stinginess, had indirectly burned down his own daughter's bakery. Justice is ironic, isn't it, Dad? I said. You lost your mother's house to pay for your own indifference. That was the last straw. My father collapsed into his chair, hands covering his face. My mother sobbed uncontrollably. Ethan looked at me with eyes mixing hatred and fear. The game was over, and they had lost. In the weeks that followed, my family self-destructed. Dad and Mom blamed each other. Mom blamed Dad for his stinginess. Dad blamed Mom for spoiling Ethan too much. Ethan, without his funding source, had to sell his sports car and work as a barista at a bar. The last I heard, he was still telling people about his artistic potential. I kept my word. I didn't turn Grandma's house into my residence. The memories there were too beautiful to be tainted by hatred. Instead, I invested a large sum, transforming it into a modern community kitchen space and a baking school. I named it the Eleanor Project, after my grandmother. It was a place for women in difficult circumstances, people with passion but lacking opportunity. We taught them baking skills, business skills, helped them stand on their own feet. 6 months later, I was standing in the middle of the Eleanor Project's kitchen space. The room overflowed with light, laughter, and the fragrant smell of freshly baked bread. A group of women were focused on decorating cream cakes, their faces glowing with joy. I was no longer lonely, Clara. I'd lost a family defined by blood, but I'd found and created a larger family, bound together by kindness, passion, and mutual respect. I looked out the window, where Grandma Eleanor's roses were blooming wide, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace, completely free. They taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most bitter rejection is actually the greatest gift. It forces you to find your own worth, not in others' approval, but from deep within yourself. It gives you a reason to stop being a victim. Have you ever felt abandoned by your own family during your darkest hour? Share your story below.